Fred talks eloquently and with great intensity about Jimmy as a mentor. Was that an experience you had with Jimmy as well?
Definitely. I mean, I would say that's one of the primary things I wanted to say about Jimmy. Because I am really a self-taught musician and really a product of this city. I didn't go to college for music. I didn't even really take piano. I took just a smattering of piano lessons in my whole life. So I really learned from the people in this city. And Jimmy was probably the top guy, both in what he communicated just through his playing, and then he was the guy really probably through who I got into the Blue Wisp, because Jimmy was playing there at first and with his quartet, but they had a jam session every Thursday night. And that's the first time I ever got to sit in with Jimmy. I'd heard him over the years, for just a few years, because everything happened pretty quickly. Anyway, I got to sit in with Jimmy, and then once Jimmy's tenure at the Blue Wisp ended, Paul and Margene Wisby had heard me sitting in there and took note. Anyway, so it was through Jimmy inviting me to play there. And that was the other thing about him. Yes, he was a mentor in that he was very inviting, very warm, and whatever talent he saw in me, he nurtured it, and just through inviting me to play and stuff like that.
Was there something that that Jimmy would do or say, to kind of give you approval when you had improved and were climbing that ladder? Were there any things he would do?
I don't know. I don't think, as I remember, not even just general stuff like you sound good and you sound great, or but mostly he did say things like, "I love you, man," and hug me. I mean, he was very warm and not fakey in any way, but just real. He had just by letting me know that he liked me, that he loved me, And I'll say this too: he's one of the only guys that would come up and just kiss you straight on the mouth, So that was, I can feel now that I say that, I can almost feel his beard right now on his lips, And of course, in traditional American society, it's not cool. But anyway, I was like, wow, this is okay, So anyway, Jimmy, he was a mentor and encouraging, and just mostly just playing with me and telling me that he loved me. And, yeah, just a great sax player. First of all, his sound was so wonderful. He had a passionate sound, and I think I'm not super expert on all the saxophone sounds, but he had all this full-bodied sound of, whoever, Gene Ammons or something. But then he had that Stan Getz, and I know he was into Stan Getz a lot. So anyway, just his expressive quality of his sound, I remember, He had lots of blues, in his playing. But then he just wasn't a patently, blues player. I mean, it was real. Anyway, he seemed like he knew bop, he knew swing, he was lyrical, he was poetic too. I mean, that's what I was thinking too. He just had that artistic, poetic soul. He had all this technical facility, but that was all at the service of his expression, Some people play in mechanical ways, some people play where you can tell they're really good players, but their heart might not be in it at the moment or whatever. But Jimmy always made sure that's the way he was. His heart was in it all the time, and that's what drove his playing.
What about the rhythmic aspects of the time, that kind of stuff?
That too, yes. He was very rhythmic. And it seems like, again, a lot of players who try to learn jazz, I don't know, in some rote sort of way, think that, everything has to be a string of eighth notes, But of course, if we listen to Charlie Parker, who maybe is one of the eighth note kings, so to speak, but he played all kinds of great rhythmic variations that, And Jimmy was like that too. Even if it might have been 8-note based, it was, yeah, it was, and it was very rhythmic, very playful. I guess there was a playfulness that came out in his playing. And also that dynamic thing where it's not all just one, da 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 da, it's like, do better, or I mean, I'm being sort of, that's a good explaining. But just the ups and downs of dynamics and expression, that's such a big part of it.
Who was in your trio at the time you were playing with Jimmy?
Well, John Von Ohlen was the drummer for for practically the whole time, which was 1980 until like 1993, or a little bit before that, John left. But anyway, so it was John Von Ohlen on drums and a few different bass players, Michael Scharf on bass, and Chris Dahlgren on bass, and then Lynn Seaton. So, and I guess Lynn was there for the longest consistent amount of time. So that was an especially fun trio. And then later when Bob Bodley moved to town, back to town, I quickly employed him.
Why don't you talk about Jimmy's repertoire, how he approached improvising, that kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, I guess his repertoire was fairly standard, and I guess we would do. I don't remember really doing his tunes that much. I guess we did do palindrome a few times, but and there were maybe a couple tunes that he played that I had to learn. But anyway, I guess I knew most of the tunes anyway. So I do think that Jimmy, yes, every tune that Jimmy played, he definitely loved and felt it, So I'm sure he did play it endlessly until he knew it inside and out. My story basically is that I took a few, like 2 years maybe, of piano lessons in late grade school or middle grade school, 5th and 6th grade, say. Wasn't really interested in it that much, didn't get that far. And then it was in high school that my desire to play music and listening to records and stuff, that's when that all started, like 8th grade going into high school. So then I wanted to play guitar. So I taught myself guitar, just played basic blues kind of stuff. But it was a great introduction to music. And then I started listening to more and more jazz, and that's when I switched back to piano. We had a piano in our house, and I would sit down and figure out jazz chords, and I didn't know. So anyway, that's how I started playing piano. And then I got in a band with somebody that moved on our street who was a really good guitar player. And he said, well, you're going to play piano and I'm going to play guitar. So I was like, okay. So I started playing keys, and I didn't intend, I just wanted to be a good musician. I had no intent on making it my career, but gigs just started happening for me. It was that's when I started going to college. I was a liberal arts major because I didn't know what I was going to do. But right at that time, gigs started happening when I started playing. And it all just developed naturally. I'm so lucky that it was that way. And then after a couple of years, I said to myself, I guess I'm a professional musician. I guess I should do this. And so it was just the desire to be a good musician. It was it felt good to be able to express myself that way. And I knew I had enough respect for it. And then that's another thing. I meet people like Jimmy McGary, who obviously were dedicated and practiced. And, I realized that if you want to do this, you got to practice all the time, And then I have to mention Cal Collins and Kenny Poole, and Dee Felice and Ed Moss. Those are just a few of the guys of that generation, generally, that I'm so indebted to for being that devoted to music. Anyway, so I could tell by Jimmy, his discipline of playing, practicing. I knew, I wasn't there every day when he's practicing, but I knew he did it, So I'm just saying, I gained the respect of the hard work along with the love you have, which inspires you, the love for music, but then, you've got to.
There, essentially, no one listens to Jimmy McGary frequently. His, there are a couple things on YouTube, but you don't discover Jimmy McGary from his recordings. Yet, he is still well known, and there are kids at CCM right now who know who he is. What do you think?
In fact, it's funny you say that. Walking here, I parked a few blocks down, and I had to walk up the street. And as I was walking out, I saw Oz Landesberg. I don't know if you know him, but he's a CCM graduate, great sax player, super musical. And he said, "What are you doing down here?" He just came out of his deli where he got a sandwich. And I said, "I'm meeting Christopher Braig for this project for Jimmy McGary." And immediately he's like, "God, I never got to hear Jimmy live." I mean, he knew all about Jimmy. He'd heard him and obviously tried to listen to him, or has actively listened to him wherever he could, online or records or recordings. But anyway, so just a few minutes before I got here, I ran into this guy who's like, "Oh, I wish I heard Jimmy McGary live. I know all about him." Da, da, da. But I guess it's just the power of his playing. And those who did get to hear him will never forget it. And those who didn't hear him will listen to him on recordings. So it was the power of his playing, but also it was the power of his personality. I mean, they were one thing: his music and his spirit and his personality. Because he was, as I said, when I think of Jimmy, I think of warm, I think of loving, also wise, and he wasn't just like a fluffy, everything's beautiful kind of guy. I mean, he did have this depth of experience, and I remember him telling me things like, one thing I remember him saying is like, sometimes people complain so much about their lives and how, their parents were divorced or they had some hard times with their parents. And he's like, their early life. And he said, "Well, I had an early life. I had hard times too." He's like, "You just gotta forget about that. You can't dwell on that. You just gotta say something like that." I mean, that was like an insight into Jimmy's depth of character. I'm sure, he just in a couple seconds, I didn't know his early life, but he talked about he had some really rough times, it sounded like, growing up, whatever was going on. But he was just saying, you can't just dwell on that. You got to be happy and think about it and be positive. So anyway, I'm saying Jimmy's spirit he did have this happiness, this love, and this poetic, expressive soul. He was funny. He did, and that's why people remember him too. And his music was joined with that.